So good afternoon, everyone, and I promise I'll be light on your beer time. So maybe sidestepping a little bit from the presentations that you've seen today, but I think it's fair to say that probably everyone in this room is impacted by what we're seeing in the marketplace with DDoS. So I just want to sort of highlight maybe some of the motivation behind this and how this is impacting infrastructures and F5's sort of view in this world. So we're seeing motivation in terms of anything from your annoyed activists that might have some sort of motivation in that space, some sort of organised crime looking for ransom, even down to something like masking some other sort of nefarious event or attack that they're trying to plan with inside that infrastructure. And really what it comes down to is consuming network resources. And that's kind of broken up into two separate spaces. So the first, and you're most likely, is filling the WAN bandwidth, and then hitting any sort of bottleneck with inside your infrastructure in terms of filling that state table, destroying the memory, whatever it might be with inside your network coming back into the application. And just to give you a few little stats on this, and I think these are key metrics here in terms of what we're seeing in DDoS, is that pretty much everyone is seeing this in the IT space. And around 65% have had 3 or more DDoS attacks, summing up to around about 50 minutes of outage time. And what this means is an impact of brand, loss of revenue or future revenue, and actual serious real-world business impacts in terms of what they're seeing in their industry. And it happens to even the biggest of us. So in November, there was a 5-day intermittent DDoS attack on NatWest RBS. So this was impacting their online banking system, but also the ATM infrastructure. So if anyone here banks with NatWest or RBS, there was a 5-day period where there was intermittent access to ATMs and being able to withdraw money. And that actually happened to me in Copenhagen during this period. So even the biggest that invest heaps in security and infrastructure are still liable to DDoS attacks if they don't have the right mitigation or network in place to deal with this type of thing. And then the second is a disaster if you're a gamer like myself. So there was a 24-hour outage to the Electronic Arts online gaming system just after Christmas, so peak time for these guys. Again, with this sort of public-facing DDoS attack, this is something that can harm their brand, can prevent future revenue, and it's something that they want to keep outside of the papers if at all possible. So putting the right DDoS strategy in place is obviously key for these guys. And just to give you a little bit of a spectrum of what we see as a typical DDoS ecosystem and what people would generally put in place to mitigate these types of attacks. So usually we would see something starting like a cloud scrubber, something like Prolexic, or even some sort of service providing offering, maybe using Arbor as that infrastructure. And that would be sort of taking away the noise before coming into the enterprise's infrastructure. And then we'd usually see that split up into a couple of different regions. So it would be your on-premise DDoS sampling device, again, maybe with Arbor, tipping point, something like that. And then your typical IDS, IPS, or also your stateful network firewalls that might have DDoS built into it. And then possibly, depending on what you're delivering or what's inside your enterprise, you might even have something in the layer 7 space to take care of each of the different layers of how DDoS might come together. And what we're seeing is, and I mentioned in the first slide, is that usually, or more often, the DDoS attacks layer 2 to layer 4 are being used as a diversion tactic to take away your view or your time away from the actual real attacks that these guys are looking to do. Your SQL injection, cross-site scripting, transaction fraud, any of these where the real money is involved. And this is just a small California regional bank, but this is happening with inside all of the finance industry that we're seeing in terms of DDoS attack. And this is a real problem for these guys. So what they need to do is look at this in a multi-layered approach. And actually, this is missing a slide. That's frustrating. So what we would normally see is, in terms of layer 2 to layer 4, there's 4 or 5 different approaches in how enterprises are looking at mitigating DDoS. And that would be cloud, maybe CDN, maybe some sort of on-premise solution, web application firewall, stateful network firewall, and really you can come up with your own solution in terms of what you want to put together. But what we're seeing in this industry in terms of layer 2 to layer 4, layer 7 DDoS, and application security in this space in general, is that typically you would need all of these technologies to make sure that you're covering the scope in terms of multi-layer. And building on some of the presentations that you've seen today, it's not just about the network now. So you've seen the presentation on DNS amplification. So obviously this is quite key in the DDoS space as well. We're also seeing stuff around SSL, like SSL renegotiation attacks. And then also your application attacks where you've got the computational pieces like slow post, slow LORIS, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, all of the OWASP type stuff. So there's not just one single way to look at how you're going to mitigate DDoS with inside your infrastructure today. And this was the slide I was looking for, actually. So, what would you choose to defend against DDoS today? So really, we would think with inside a proper infrastructure, in financial services, in service provider, in large e-commerce, that all of the above is true in terms of how you want to look at this approach. And for me, we have a booth back here in the breakout session. So if you guys have got any questions, feel free to drop by there if you've got questions now, and see what F5 has got to offer with inside that DDoS space.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
Thank you.